Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Leaders from the world's largest economies have gathered in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil for the G20 Summit that kicked off on the 18th of November. The Brazilian President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva opened the session with the launch of an alliance to combat hunger and poverty. Quoting figures from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the Brazilian president said, with 733 million undernourished people worldwide, hunger is a scourge that shames humanity. Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcomed the Brazilian initiative to establish a global alliance against hunger and poverty, underlining that the global south was severely impacted by food, fuel and fertilizer crises created by the ongoing conflicts, and therefore their concerns ought to be given primacy. Taking part in the session, the Prime Minister spoke about India's initiatives to deal with hunger and poverty, noting that the country had pulled 250 million people out of poverty in the last 10 years. Further, free food grains are being distributed to 800 million people across the country. The Prime Minister also used the opportunity to highlight the steps taken by India to strengthen food security in Africa and elsewhere. So we'll be talking about some of these initiatives and the impact that they're making. And we'll also discuss how the Brazilian G20 agenda is taking forward the people-centric decisions of the New Delhi G20 Summit in 2023. For this, joining me are two distinguished guests. So let me begin by introducing them to you. I'm delighted to have with me former Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. He's a distinguished fellow, Vivekananda International Foundation. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Anshu Joshi, Assistant Professor, School of International Studies, JNU. Professor, glad to have you with us on the program as well. Ambassador, coming to you first, and a statement, a significant one that the Prime Minister made at the opening session. In what ways do you see the G20 Summit 2024 in Brazil taking forward the people-centric decisions that were taken last year in New Delhi when India was the chair?
Well, as you know, Tinaji, that all the three summits that have been held in Indonesia, India and Brazil are being held under the increasing conflicts in Middle East as well as in Eurasia. And the Eurasian event, Russia-Ukraine war, is the one that has started the major problem, as we call as 3F or 4F crisis, which is food, fertilizer and fuel crisis. And we have just seen that the United States has seen a transition. And the new President Trump has come, who has his own views on climate change and several other very important initiatives that have a direct impact on the health of the global south, apart from the ongoing issues of 3Fs. And under this, it is very important, and as has been mentioned by Prime Minister Modi and President Lula, that the alleviation of the nutrition, alleviation of the lack of nutrition and the food and secure food security are extremely important, and how to provide that. Now, this is really a disaster that in the 21st century, hunger still prevails to a large extent.
Right.
And that's precisely what this global alliance that has been launched under President Lula's presidency of the G20. Prime Minister Modi is speaking has very clearly mentioned that this was a continuation in many ways, and that's a very good thing that the developing countries who are holding this presidency continuously for 4 successive years, and the next one goes to South Africa, are continuing with the same principles. Prime Minister Modi, as you know, under our G20 presidency, had done 2 very important things. One was giving it a globalist outlook through our policy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or one health, one family, one future. And everything was veering around that. And how to invigorate investments and refocus on the SDGs. Secondly, how to bring about the developing world back into the G20 format, through not only as a special invitee, but as a permanent member. And in that sense, I think one of the biggest achievements I hold as far as India's presidency was that African Union with 55 members was made a permanent member of that, and this time they are participating in full force. And we are continuing to collaborate with them so that they can extract the maximum mileage out of this.
Right.
And at the same time, we are also seeing that just now the COP29, which has been held, is something that has been virtually a washout. On the other hand, India has done tremendously well, which Prime Minister outlined, that how we have used digitization in agriculture, how we have bring about various schemes to provide nutrition for children, a midday meal, how we are providing for 800 million people the subsistence food. I mean, this kind of assistance, so that we have been able to bring about, and that's a visible thing, about 250 million people out of poverty.
You're
So
right,
these
Ambassador, and not just in India. If you go by the Prime Minister's statement, we're also helping countries in Africa and elsewhere fight hunger and poverty. We'll come to that aspect in just a bit. Let me get in Dr. Joshi's perspective on the G20 Summit in Brazil, the agenda. Dr. Joshi, what we are seeing in terms of similarities with the G20 presidency of India is that our central theme last year was accelerating strong, balanced and inclusive growth under the larger theme of one world, one family, one future. What we are seeing now in Brazil is, and what they have also highlighted as the central theme of their presidency is fighting hunger and poverty, and very strong statements coming in from the Brazilian president that in a world which produces about 6 billion tons of food grains every year, 733 million undernourished people is a scourge that should shame humanity. The question here is, how will it resonate among those who will make the difference? Will the world leaders, and I believe it's approximately 92% of the world's GDP that accounts for G20, will these leaders take the opportunity to do something about it so that this translates into some kind of outcome?
That's a very good question, and that is what India keeps reiterating from different multilateral platforms, that despite having all these international vehicles, all these multilateral platforms, all these international institutions, why we still have these challenges related to food security, or for that matter, energy security or sustainable development and so on. And when we look at the theme of this G20's presidency under the leadership of Brazil, which is building a just and a sustainable planet, wherein Brazil has given priority to three important dimensions. First, it is about fighting with poverty, hunger, and inequality. The second dimension revolves around sustainable development in three related to aspects: economic, social, and political. And last but not the least, a very important dimension, a very important agenda, again, like put forward by India, which is related to reforms of multilateral platforms. And when we look at this theme as a whole, it takes us back to the time of last year when India had the presidency of G20, and we spoke about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we spoke about one earth, one family, one future. So both the themes actually connect with each other. We spoke about democratization of mighty platforms like G20, wherein under our presidency, African Union as a permanent member could get a place in G20, which was earlier known as a face of the Western lobby or Western nations. And it is also happening for the first time that consecutively, second time, the Troika comprises global South nations. Last time, the Troika was made of Indonesia, India, and Brazil. And this time, Troika comprises India, Brazil, and South Africa. So indeed, we have enough time to take a look at all these prioritized objectives pertaining to the area of food security and poverty and unemployment and climate change containment and sustainable development, of course, women leadership, and so on. So this is time when world is already going through a lot of geopolitical turmoils. Also, we can see that there are two clear-cut open war theaters. Russia-Ukraine war is going on. On the other hand, this Israel-Hamas conflict is not stopping. We can see an indirect war theater in Indo-Pacific region. And this is the time when world is already facing repercussions of COVID-19. So yes, there are a lot of challenges, and you were apt when you said that a world which has so many developed nations and the kind of progress we have made as a world in all these years, if despite that we have issues related to hunger and poverty, definitely these challenges have to be prioritized and solutions are to be found out. And that's where Brazil is coming up with some action items, as in these platforms should not only remain a platform to just come and discuss the matter, but there are serious questions, issues related to funding. And
Right.
that's where Brazil is coming up with certain initiatives. It is announcing certain task forces, and that is what India also keeps reiterating. So I hope that there would be some solid outcomes of this G20 summit.
Right, Professor. And funding is something that also relates to the climate finance, which Ambassador Srinath referred to. Climate finance is something that needs to be discussed. COP29, we're seeing it's a virtual washout. They were banking on the G20 to sit down and discuss how that climate finance will work out. But coming back to the aspect of G20, the sticking to the theme, Ambassador, the global hunger and poverty, where we heard the Prime Minister highlight how we've pulled out more than 250 million people out of poverty in the last 10 years in India itself. We are also extending that help to countries in Africa and elsewhere around the world. Talk to us about some of these initiatives which are making a difference, because we believe in being a Vishwamitra. We've often heard the Prime Minister, the External Affairs Minister say that India wants to be a force for global good. And in that aspect, we would like to share all the opportunities, all the benefits with not just the Indians, but to people where these benefits are not reaching, particularly countries of the global south.
Well, you have seen that when we held our presidency, the first thing Prime Minister Modi said that let us have a Global South Summit. It was a virtual summit. And in that, about 125 countries and several leaders participated. And it was not to just, if you give this kind of study to be conducted, any consultant can give you a very good study and everybody seems to know what are the problems. But what we wanted was that their voice should be heard, that they should speak for themselves what exactly they need, what are their requirements. And so the Voice of Global South Summit was held. Whatever their recommendations, whatever their aspirations, India was able to plow it into the G20 negotiations and discussions and under all verticals during that period. Whatever the innovations that India has done, whatever technology that we have produced, whatever capacity building expertise that we have been sharing it with the Global South with 161 countries for the last almost 50 years, 70 years. And therefore, India has always stood with the voice of with the Global South in every which way that you can look at it, whether it's international organizations for having their voice, fighting for them in the WTO and the Doha agenda for that, in the climate change negotiations, India always. So we have been providing direct assistance. We are working together with these countries. At the same time, we are also trying to be their voice for their own benefit across the world. And that's why India is acknowledged as a leader for them and for carrying out this. Like, for example, when there was this pandemic, all the countries were hoarding, the big countries which had produced the vaccine. India was one of the only countries in the world probably which went out and gave it to more than 100 countries, while we have the largest population of the world to cater to. At the same time, we provided medical assistance to about 150 countries. To a large number of countries who are our ITech partners, we conducted online seminars for their health workers. Right. India provided whatever was necessary at the time. And therefore, and at the end in our G20 summit, G20 meeting, India's biggest contribution, as has been also brought out by Professor Joshi, is that inclusion of the African Union, which in this summit is participating as a full member, looking after the interests of Africa. So India has not only been talking, but has been delivering for its own people as well as for the world. That's why we believe in Vasudha Kutumbakam.
Ambassador, you're right. Perhaps it is this goodwill that we generated during the pandemic, our approach during the G20, when we tried to give voice to the underrepresented world through the Voice of Global Summit, the trust that India and the efforts that India made towards inclusion of the African Union. These are aspects, and also our strong bilateral relationships that we have with countries. It helped us reach that consensus in adopting the New Delhi Declaration, something on which a lot of doubts were cast. And I remember last year when we were discussing in our studios, a lot of analysts said that India pulled out a miracle through that consensus and in adoption of the New Delhi Declaration. Cut to 2024. The geopolitical scenario remains pretty much the same. In fact, the war in the Middle East is something that's an add-on as a challenge to Brazil. In the prevailing circumstances, also the power change in America, how difficult would it have been for Brazil from a diplomatic point of view to come out with that broad declaration? Ambassador.
Well, I think this has been unfortunately the case of all the three developing countries who have held the presidency. You remember in Indonesia, it was India's formulation that saved the day, and the Bali Declaration was issued. In 2023, when we held the presidency, it was Prime Minister Modi's personal relationship, frankly, with the top world leaders that allowed the possibility of the declaration. You know, throughout our the discussions, no joint declaration could be issued, whether it's the foreign minister, the finance minister, or others. There were only statements. But in the end, India delivered and delivered very successfully. Now, Brazil is also having into the same problem right now. The kind of issues, and you mentioned about the transition of President Biden being currently, as it is called in the American parlance, a lame duck president. I mean, he's there, but before coming here, he has already authorized the Ukrainians to use the American weapon system to hit the Russian landscape, which means causing or allowing them more funding, which means giving a little more, putting more ghee into the fire. And that's precisely what is going to have a major impact going forward in this. So I don't know exactly how it will work out, whether the Brazilians will be able to issue a declaration. And if it is on the same lines as that of India, I think this is one role that India will probably there also be playing like we did in Bali. So hopefully there will be a declaration, because the challenges that we are talking about, those challenges are very real. Those are the global challenges. They are not localized challenges. And therefore, the world has to come together, and not only come together to issue declarations because they mean nothing. Frankly, because this organization, G20, everything is done by consensus, and there it does not have any force of implementation behind it. It is understood that as a good measure, you will be able to carry on what you have committed. But the nations are not known to do that. So therefore, we'll have to evolve certain kind of mechanisms. But the least one can do is agree on the challenges that face and the way forward.
You're
Hopefully,
right,
it will be done.
Dr. Joshi, despite the challenges that we are talking about, the G20 is a platform which is best suited for international leaders to sit together and through international cooperation, through political will, find solutions to these problems. In addition to the central theme this year, what are the other pertinent issues related to regional and international domains that you think have found place on the high table?
I think more or less the agenda of, for that matter, prioritized objectives remain the same. However, we can see some added dimensions to this agenda, for that matter, objectives. For example, look at this challenge related to climate change containment, wherein parallelly COP is also being scheduled. And I would also like to add here that next year, Brazil would be hosting COP 30.
Yes.
But then we have seen that how, because of lack of this, consensus in COP 29 also, we could see that there was nothing miraculous. And like the other COPs, again, there were some, there was a clear-cut divide when it comes to climate justice. So for that matter, giving the action items or goals related to carbon emissions, and that's where India also keeps iterating that there has to be a transparent mechanism, and the biases should not be there when the countries are asked to cut down on their carbon emissions. When we look at a country like Brazil, or for that matter other countries of global south, I would like to add this particular dimension of cutting down their dependency on fossil fuel based mechanism or system, to like adopting renewable sources of energy. And that's where last year India had announced biofuel alliance, wherein Brazil is a major partner. And before that, India pioneered solar alliance, and because of its geostrategic location, Brazil is like the another leader in this particular initiative, wherein India is talking about one earth, one grid. So I think that would find a place on the table as a prioritized agenda, what the nations are doing to it. And again, a lot of science and technology related R&D, and for that matter funding would be required. So how the other nations are adding to it or contributing to it would come into the picture. Also science and tech related to agricultural practices, then innovative practices and startups. Women led development also should find a center place, because last year India also explained the difference between women empowerment and women led development.
Right.
So that is what India said, that now this is not the time for women empowerment only, it is about providing women the leadership space, just like the global south nations who want to get leadership positions in the global politics. So I think that will also find a place on the center table. And then there are like rest of the things are related to these geopolitical issues, as in the wars going on in both the regions, in Levant region, and between Russia and Ukraine. And our honorable Prime Minister is continuously asking all the leaders to come together on the diplomatic table and find out solutions to these conflicts. And I hope this time also he would find time bilaterally. He has already held talks yesterday night, I think, with the leaders of 6 nations. And I think today we would see that he might come up with some plausible solutions, or like he would like to bring all these leaders together, because thankfully Xi from China and Russian leaders and US leaders and everybody, I mean delegations from all these countries are present in Brazil at the moment.
You're right. And the Prime Minister, we've seen, has held several bilaterals as well on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Brazil. Ambassador, I'll take one important question that's being talked about. During his meeting with the Prime Minister of the UK, the news reports say they had discussions about extraditing the economic offenders who find a way to London, and they're all settled there, and that's a deadlock that we've been unable to resolve over the years. Do you think things could move, and that could be an important turning point as far as checking economic offences in the country is concerned?
Well, I hope that the Britishers learn to respect the law that they have themselves created and the kind of treaty. But unfortunately, it has not been so. We have seen so many offenders are already there, and they continue to take reports to their legal loopholes in their system. And for political reasons, I would say that they have not been able to extradite these people to India for one very flimsy reasons. Like sometimes in certain cases, they say that the conditions of Indian jails are not good enough. I mean, what do you do with these kind of things? They should be thinking about the offenders, the offenses that they have committed, rather than kind of really untenable arguments that they make. Hopefully, Prime Minister has been able to convince the new British Prime Minister about the need to bring about the normalcy in our relationship by extraditing these people. One thing I heard was that also the UK Prime Minister said that he'll expedite the India-UK free trade agreement. I mean, that's also a good news, and let us see how it plays out eventually. So in these big multilateral meetings, one of the important things is that you tend to meet several leaders and try to push various issues that have been pending at the bilateral level as well. And Prime Minister Modi has tremendous personal chemistry with a large number of leaders, as was clearly evident during his interactions, and which we all saw on the television. I think that he will also play a very great role in the success of the Brazilian presidency, which India is committed to.
You're right, and these bilaterals are extremely significant because, as you rightly said, some important outcomes come out of those meetings. Interestingly, the External Affairs Minister also met his Chinese counterpart on the sidelines of the summit. This was crucial because it was the first ever since the disengagement deal in October began, and we hope that India-China ties will from here on improve, because that's a win-win situation and in the benefit of both Asian giants. So on that note, we'll have to wind up the program. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of Perspective. Thank you once again, Dr. Joshi and Ambassador Thrignath, for joining us on Sansad TV, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. To you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.